to the next video in my series on guided doodling. This video is going to be all about patterns and textures. If you followed along in the first video on lines and shapes, you might have a page that looks something like this. And that's great because you'll need a page with lots of open space to work on the activities that we're doing today. You will also need a marker or two, or a pen of some sort, some pencil crayons or some wax crayons. On the other hand, you might have a page that looks more like this one, in which case you'll want to go back and create a new page, either by watching the first video or doing some doodling with lines and shapes, to create a page that has lots of open areas. Anyway, so let's get started. I'll meet you over at my art desk in just a moment. First of all, let's work with dots. Dots, dots, dots. So you can just choose one of your areas, and I'm going to choose this one here, and start making some dots in that area. Some of your dots can be far apart, or they can be close together, and you can see what happens, how things change if you cluster dots close together or have them far apart. It creates a different effect. Your dots can also be quite regularly lined up, so I can create a series of dots that create an implied line. It's not a line, it's just a series of dots, but they create a line. Our eyes see a line there. Or you can just do random dots. You can also change the tool that you're working with and make some dots with a different tool. Maybe those dots will have a different effect. And what happens if you mix your dots up? Same thing, they can be far apart or close together. The artistic name for this technique, creating dots like this, is stippling or pointillism. So you're creating art now. Instead of long lines that meander around on the page, we'll draw some short lines, some just sort of short stabbing lines, that run parallel to each other, and we can change directions. And if you change the directions of your lines, you create a texture. Lines can also overlap, so the technical term, of course artists have words for everything, the technical term for these sort of short parallel lines like this is hatching. And then if you go over your parallel lines with another set of lines, that's called cross-hatching. So that also creates a textured area in your work. You can intentionally do some hatching just on one side of your shapes, and that will create an illusion of depth. You can also use hatching kind of in a random way to create a furry texture to a shape. Lots of short lines, they can be kind of in random directions, in all directions. It looks a little bit like hair. You can cover the whole area with hair or just part of it. So you can take your areas and choose either a line pattern sequence or a series of shapes. So let's say I'm going to choose triangles, small triangles. And I'm going to fill this area with small triangles, and that creates a pattern. And after I've filled my area with triangles, I can start to embellish those triangles. Maybe they don't want to stay triangles. Maybe each of the triangles wants to have some lines on them. Or maybe just some of the triangles want to have lines. Maybe some of the other ones want to have lines on the inside. And as you start to create those different patterns, do you notice that in your mind, when you look at these shapes, that some of them belong together? the shapes that seem similar to each other. Sometimes in our brain tells us that those belong together. We start to form a grouping. And there were a group of psychologists that describe what they call gestalt, the way that our brain creates connections, similar shapes, similar patterns, similar colors. Sometimes it's proximity. The shapes that are close together seem like they belong together and the shapes that the objects that are further away seem like outliers. Just the way that our brain starts to think about things. What else can we do? Oh, I know. Let's make a spot in one of our shapes. And from this spot, you're going to draw a series of straight lines that radiate from that spot out to the edges of your shape. And just as you're doing this, again, bring your attention to what you're doing and think about this. You're drawing lines that go around in various directions. And as you draw them, do you find it easier to draw lines in some directions than other directions? Sometimes people find it easier to draw lines that come towards them, and a little bit harder. It feels a little bit harder to push the lines away. If you find that, and if you want to, you can always rotate your paper. And now once you've done that, go back and I'm going to count how many wedges, how many spaces you've created. So make sure that you've created an even number of spaces, because the next thing that we're going to do kind of relies on there being an even number of spaces. And if you haven't got an even number, if you've got an odd number, add another line somewhere so that you have an even number of spaces. And now we're going to make a series of lines that radiate around. So the first line I'm going to draw is going to be a curved line from one of these spokes to the next one. The next one is straight. The next one is curved, straight, curved, straight, curved, straight, curved, straight, curved, straight. And if I have an even number of spaces, I'll end up with a regular sequence, and I'll end up with a straight line with a curved line next to it. If I had an odd number of spaces, I'd end up either with two curved lines or two straight lines beside each other. And now do another row, keeping the sequence the same. So in the area where there's a curve, another curve, straight, curve, straight, curve. And then just keep going like that. Around the circle, around the spokes. And again, how does this feel? Is it easy for you to draw the line from one spoke to another? Is that a bit challenging? Is this maybe something you could practice to make your lines a little bit more accurate? Is it something that you don't want to worry about? Do you not care if your lines are accurate? And when I get to areas like this where I don't have any more space, I just skip that area and go back, and I can tell what I'm supposed to do because I just follow the pattern that I've established previously. I'm just going to keep going until I get right to the outer edge. And one of the types of lines that I like to use is called a contour line. The contour lines really describe a form or 3D shape, and they can go across the page. They don't cross, they run parallel to each other. They can get closer to each other, further away. They can curve, they can be straight, but they never cross each other. So another way to do some contour lines is to start in the middle and do sort of similar to the lines that we were doing here, but these, we don't have the spokes, and they just sort of follow, just line up around the outside. So these are just really doodling. So
You see these sorts of contour lines on old maps. And sometimes these contour lines, I think, start to look like wood grain, a wood grain appearance. They can also go straight. That looks like a knot in the wood. So you can continue working on this page and add whatever you want. I've got a huge, big blank area here, so I might add some more lines.